Alright, what is going on, everybody? How are we doing? It's your boy Steve Mingleco with Final Web Design. New video today. I want to go over what it takes to become a front-end developer. Final Web Design, this is Steve. Which is my main special is what I focus on is front-end web development. So everything from UI, UX, everything moving on the front end. I do know a lot of back-end PHP, MySQL databases, some of those back-end languages and such, but I like to focus on the front end. I think front end's got a lot more integrative over the last few years. You got a lot more moving pieces, a lot more dynamic content moving around and things like that. So let's just take a look here. The very first skill you're going to want to know is HTML. Now, HTML is very popular. It's all over the internet. You've probably come across it. It is relatively easy to learn. I say relatively easy to learn because there are features and things that you can kind of go down a rabbit hole, but at the same time, getting straight to just putting basic content is what HTML does. So it just gets the information on the page. It doesn't do the design. It doesn't do any of the kind of the movements and interactivity, but it does get the content up on the site. So the second thing to becoming a good front-end developer is to learn CSS. Now, CSS, some people find it easy, some people find it difficult. Thing about CSS is you really just got to get your hands dirty because there's a lot of different tools that you can use to make CSS easier, but you kind of have to know the basics of CSS so that once you know the basics, you can move on to some of these frameworks and libraries and stuff such as the Bootstrap and the CSS grid, and then even some things to pull icons and imagery and such like Font Awesome. And CSS is not new, but it's basically just the styling and the overall look of your web page. So like how this navigation on here is laid out, how this grid layout is, this button is designed with CSS. So HTML is basically your framework of the site, CSS is your design, and that brings us down a rabbit hole of CSS which goes into Bootstrap, CSS grid, and Font Awesome. And now these are all just CSS libraries and tools that allow you to do more styling. So this site itself is actually built with Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is basically just a library of CSS elements that are going to allow you to style and design your site. CSS grid, this was created kind of as a way to make things responsive with things like mobiles and tablets and these new outlets that were becoming more and more popular. So as people went to build their sites for these outlets, you needed a tool that would kind of responsive the design. So that's where CSS grid comes in. So you can see some of these block elements that are used in the grid system. And then the final thing I'll just briefly touch is material UI design. So any type of thing where you can get icons and imagery and things like that you want to include. So like if you go down here to our social media icons, these are not actually images. These are being pulled in with the Font Awesome. So so we've basically covered HTML, we've covered CSS and some of the libraries and stuff CSS has to becoming a front-end developer. So let's go into JavaScript. Now this is a big one that a lot of people get stuck at. And the reason that JavaScript is a little more technical is because it's actually a programming language. HTML is just what they call hypertext markup language. So it basically just presents the links and the images and the data or the structure of the site. And the CSS is also not really a programming language, it's just a styling code for the site. So JavaScript is where you actually go into programming and actually building interactivity, reloading stuff, manipulating data and things like that. And the big ones out there with JavaScript right now and that are powering a lot of front-end development are Angular, which has been around for quite a while. It was created by Google, and it has a pretty steep learning curve. It's not easy, but a lot of companies, corporations are using it. jQuery is kind of falling apart. You don't see as many people using jQuery anymore because jQuery has become kind of second to a lot of these other frameworks. So I won't go into Node because that's backend and this is a front end video, but it's basically JavaScript for the server. React is huge. So if you're learning React, a lot of corporations are using this. Again, it is a JavaScript framework. The thing about it is a lot of people like it for its PWA, progressive web app functionality, and that also takes us to Vue.js, which is becoming increasingly important. So just taking a quick look at these, we have the Angular, again, created by Google, super popular for big corporations and such. We have jQuery, which is sorry about that. Just a framework or a library of JavaScript that can be used. It's not as popular anymore, so you won't be spending too much time with that going forward. Then you have React, which is very popular and becoming increasingly popular for a lot of web applications. And finally, Vue, which is my personal favorite and the one that I spend the most time working and programming in. And I love Vue.js. That's why to be a front-end developer, I would say get to learn Vue.js. It's super important. The other two elements that I'm going to just talk about quickly to becoming a front-end developer, and I won't take too much time, is know your version control. So as a front-end developer, you're going to be creating these UI elements on the front. You're going to want to push that code up to somebody who's also working on components and such with the site. And using something like Bitbucket or a GitHub or a GitLab, there's a lot of them out there that you can use that will store a repository of your code, and then you're able to go back and pull that information with a Git language, which is basically just the code you use to push the material. So learn version control, super important, and then get yourself a coding editor, and I suggest Visual Studio Code. Sorry, choking on this coffee. The Visual Studio Code is a great editor. It's by Microsoft. It's open source, so you're able to use it free of charge, and it's super powerful. A lot of corporations are still using this. So guys, that's just kind of a quick rundown of becoming a front-end developer. Start with HTML, move into CSS and get to learn CSS and all the libraries like Bootstrap and CSS Grid and Font Awesome. Then get your hands dirty with JavaScript and moving and interacting your website, moving sliders, moving content and such around. That is going to be with your JavaScript. And then when you're getting into the front end frameworks, you're going to probably want Angular, React, or Vue.js to actually build these applications. Finally, just a few tools. You want to know version control for pushing it up, and you'll want to have a coding editor for coding and pushing the code also, or creating the code, I should say. So with that being said, guys, that is front-end web development in a nutshell. You can go down a lot of different things like connecting the front end to the back end. We could talk all about the back end with the databases and the APIs and how all that kind of comes to pull the data into the front end. But this video is really just about talking about what are the basic skills you're going to need to be a front end developer. Now, these skills don't happen overnight. A lot of these take, a while to really get comfortable with. And the more you use them, the more familiar you're going to get with them. A skill like HTML, really, you should be able to pick that up pretty quick if you're just getting the basics and not trying to, create a whole interactive website. You just need to take these things in small chunks and really break them down to what their what does HTML do and what is its purpose for a front-end developer? What does CSS do and what purpose does it serve for the front end of a website and the UI UX? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the bottom. A like, a subscribe, that stuff helps. And with that, we will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.